For Florida's Senate race, one of Rubio's challengers is Representative Val Demings. Now, Demings is a former police chief from Orlando, but that doesn't guarantee her the backing of the blue. In fact, this past week, Senator Rubio made a campaign stop in Tampa to pick up the endorsement of the Florida Police Chiefs Association. I spoke with him afterwards on everything from inflation to the rising crime rates. Senator, I want to start off by asking you about the news today here in Florida. That's that the governor's going to extend the special session. He's going to take a hard look at these special privileges that Disney has. I know in your news conference you said, well, if Disney wants to argue that they deserve those, let them. But on the principle of the matter, the governor feels like they are just overdosing on woke, that they went too far to go against him when it came to what is taught in school. What's your feeling of on the principle of this argument? Is it a fight worth having?
Well, I think there's two separate issues. One is why does Reedy Creek exist and why is it justified? And I've actually asked myself that in the past before all this happened. But if it is justified and there's a really good reason for it, then I think Disney will have an opportunity to make that argument. I think the broader argument isn't just about the woke part. I think the broader argument is this. You have companies like Disney, as an example, that benefit greatly from being in Florida, that benefit greatly from this treatment under the law, and that benefit greatly from being of American origin. And yet, they also benefit greatly from the work they do. They have a park in China, and they never say a word about China. But if they don't like what some democratically elected legislature does in a state like Florida, then they throw the full weight of their corporate power against those people in their criticisms and in their attacks. And so I think when you do those sorts of things, I think you remind people and you ask yourself, well, why do we treat them any different than we do any other company in Florida? And I think that's what's happened here. There's real anger at it. I don't think this is limited to Disney. I think there are many other corporations out there that have chosen the same route. And at the end of the day, I think that, frankly, if companies are going to behave this way, then I think they should be prepared to sort of justify why they think they deserve special treatment, if at all, within the law.
I want to pivot right away to inflation because poll after poll shows that is easily, by far and away, top of mind for voters. It's high everywhere. It's super high here in Tampa. We're up over 10%, one of the highest, if not the highest in the nation. People are hurting. What do you see as the main driver of inflation right now?
Well, first of all, actually, Tampa's at 10. I think the federal level's at 8, so it's 2 points higher, which is pretty substantial. And what this means is it's people who got raises or whatever, it just ate that up. It blew it up, and you can see it every single day, and everything costs more. There literally is nothing at this point that you can't get it. You can't get it at a higher, unless you pay a lot more for it. What's behind it is pretty simple. When they used to teach economics in schools, this is very simple. It's a supply and demand issue. There's less supply because we outsourced all of our jobs, all of our factories, all the component pieces, sent them to China, sent them to other countries, because we decided at some point 20 years ago that it wasn't important, and the demand is greater because we have flooded, we have flooded the market and the economy. Again, last, was it March, 1.7 trillion government dollars poured into the economy, and then an infrastructure package on top of that. So you have more dollars of government money blowing that up, chasing limited goods. There is no easy short-term answer, but it's something that the administration should have taken seriously last year when we were warning about it, and they didn't. They said it was transitory, it was going to go away. They downplayed it. Now it's real. Those are the drivers, and the solution is to make more things in America, or at least closer to America. Let's not continue to be so dependent on making so many important things in places like China, but I include Vietnam and these other countries in Asia as well.
The other thing that people are suffering is when they go to fill up their gas tanks. I spoke to your likely opponent, Representative Val Demings, on Political Connections a couple of weeks ago. She said she thought the answer to high gas prices was one thing the president is doing to tap the reserve. She also mentioned holding oil and gas companies accountable. What do you see as what needs to be done to get some relief at the pump?
Val Demings gave you silly answers. Okay, number one, the president's already tapped the reserves. Okay, those reserves are there in time of war, but you can't lower the gas prices and the oil prices with the reserves. There's not enough in there. That's designed for an emergency, 2 weeks. That was after the oil embargo. So that doesn't solve the problem, and not even Biden claims that it would solve the problem. I don't know what hold the oil companies accountable means. I don't know what she means by that. I can tell you it's very simple. Oil prices are set in the global market, and they're set in the global market by availability. The more oil that's available and produced, the lower the price is. There's less oil in the market for two reasons. Because we stopped producing. Today, America pumps 1.2 million barrels a day less than we did in 2019. And the Saudis and OPEC stopped producing because they want the price to be higher. So we basically unilaterally disarmed. The answer is for America to be able to produce more oil again. And publicly, Biden says he's against it, but now privately, behind the backs of the left, he's now starting to say, well, we're going to be permitting a little bit more, and he's starting to get some blowback from the Green New Deal people. So look, they don't have an answer because they created this problem, because it's a fantasy. I'm all for doing everything that has to do with renewables, that's all great, but you can't power the economy right now with just renewables and this other stuff. You need to have oil, you need to have natural gas. We're blessed with both. We should be producing more. That's the answer.
The war in Ukraine hasn't helped. It's not what sent the price up initially, but it certainly hasn't helped any. And another thing that's not going to help is food prices, because Ukraine is a big ag producer. Are we going to look at some serious food shortages from this?
Well, I hope not. We could. And I think it's what the pandemic and then the war has been a good reminder of is how things that happen halfway around the world have an impact on us. So Ukraine, I believe, is the second or third largest wheat producer in the world, pretty substantial corn producer as well. They're also one of the, so they produce these things, and then them in combination with the Russians are one of the leading producers of potash, which is used in fertilizer. And so even though we don't buy from them, if there's less wheat in the world, the wheat supply is lower, the price of it goes up. And this is not something you can just turn the knob on and produce more. There's growing seasons and harvests for it. So we could potentially see some higher prices as a result of it. But that's a different dynamic and a very serious one from the initial one we talked about when it comes to oil and natural gas. The reason why Europe was, one of the reasons why Vladimir Putin invades Ukraine is because Europe embraced a bunch of crazy policies on energy, depended on Russia for natural gas, and the Russians thought, well, we have leverage over them. Now's the time to act. 50% of the natural gas in Germany, for example, came from Russia. And so they moved. Obviously, it didn't turn out well for the Russians, but that's the calculus they made. I think it's crazy that we have leaders that have left our nation vulnerable to China, to Russia, to Iran on oil and natural gas.
You're here in Tampa to pick up another law enforcement endorsement, and crime is an issue that voters are looking at once again. For many years, it wasn't. But it's going up. It's going up everywhere, even in Tampa, which I consider to be a very safe community. But we've seen aggravated battery go way up. Murders are up to the highest they've been since 1994. What is behind this? And more importantly, how do you nip it before it gets worse?
Well, a couple things that are behind it. The first, I think, is a couple years ago, we had leaders, including Val Demings and others, that sort of joined this chorus of attacking law enforcement or criticizing or second-guessing law enforcement. And the result of it is it created the spirit of we can do things because law enforcement will get blamed for it if we interact with them and it turns out negative. That's number one. Number two is, in many parts of this country, they pursued these policies of we're not going to prosecute certain crimes. Certain prosecutors will not prosecute certain crimes. Early release. Let's let people out of jail early because we don't think their crime was that serious or because of COVID or whatever it may be. So if we know that there's a high level of recidivism in general among people that commit crimes in the past. You release more of them into streets that now believe that the consequences of breaking the law are not as high as they used to be, you're going to get more crime. And that's what we're now seeing, on top of a growing lack of total respect for law enforcement. A few weeks ago, I was at a CVS, and the clerk was telling me some guy walked in to steal a bunch of wine right in front of her. And she confronted the guy, and the guy says, go ahead, call the police. They're not going to do anything to me. As if he's done this multiple times. Actually had the audacity to come back and ask her for plastic bags to put the wine that he stole. These people they're facing it every single day now. I mean, you go to most stores, they've got stuff, I mean, you can't even buy a razor anymore. It's locked up behind something, but they've kept locking things up. People just come in and clean off the shelves because they believe that if somebody calls the police isn't going to do anything about it. They're not going to do anything about it because they don't want to deal with the hassle that might come with it. That's fueling a lot of this, and that leads, of course, to more violent crimes later.
We heard one of the police chiefs mention the fentanyl coming across the border. Do we have operational control of our southern border?
We do not. We do not. Look, the same networks that are used to bring in people are used to bringing drugs. In fact, bringing in the drugs is easier. And what's really insidious about it is all the precursors are actually made in China. China sends them to Mexico in these laboratories, including these pill stampers, these machines that actually make pills. So they can actually stamp a pill that looks like a Percocet or a Vicodin, but it's actually a fentanyl. Someone buys it online or from the street, they think they're taking Vicodin or Percocet, they're taking fentanyl, they're dead. Okay? They're fueling it, and we know it. And we're not, so if you have a border in which all of your agents are dealing with the fact that we've got 6,000 people a day coming across and you've got to process that, it just creates the opportunity for more of this to come across. The same networks that are trafficking in people are trafficking in the drugs, and they're deliberately targeting America. I'm convinced that part of this is China's revenge on America. It's part of it is can they undermine our culture by addicting and killing as many Americans in society as possible. They believe it harms the country. There's no doubt in my mind but this is by design.
Is it going to get worse? Is there going to be a change in Title 42 that makes this even worse?
Well, what Title 42 does is it basically says that now if you cross the border illegally, turn yourself in, you can say, I'm here, you say the magic words of asylum, they have to process you and release you. Those people will then call home and say, I got in, this is how I did it, more people will come. So it'll absolutely fuel it. We know, for example, there are upwards of close to 200,000 people within 1 day's walking distance of the border, all poised and ready for that Title 42 to go away. That's something, by the way, Val Demings supported. She wrote a letter. I know she told you in a previous interview, or she said yesterday she wasn't for it anymore. She is. She wrote a letter. She signed her name on a letter to Joe Biden asking him to get rid of Title 42. Well, here it is. And we saw yesterday in court that ICE told a federal judge, we are preparing to apprehend and release 600,000 illegal immigrants in the next 5 months. That's going to happen. We've never seen a crisis like that before, 100% fueled by this administration and people like Val Demings that support these crazy policies.
And finally, Senator, I want to ask you, I know you've said many times, you said at a speech recently at the Heritage Foundation, Americans better wake up when it comes to China. What's your biggest fear there?
Well, I don't know if it's about fear. I think it's more about concern that we're not waking up in time to figure out the fact that China has a well-designed plan to supplant America as the world's most powerful country. They've been working on it for 20 years while we are arguing about silly and trivial things. They're focused on that. Across the board, they steal our research. They steal our intellectual property. They hack into our computers and steal it that way. They steal our companies. They steal our jobs. They're building up their military. They're fueling disinformation. They use our corporations as lobbyists on their behalf. I don't know anyone in Congress that's worked harder against them than I have. The Taiwan bill, the Uyghur bill, the Hong Kong bill, the Chinese Communist Party hates me so much, I believe I'm one of the few of only members of Congress that's been banned and sanctioned by the Chinese government, and I'm proud of that. It's a badge of honor. But that's going to be the challenge of the 21st century. That's going to define the 21st century, the relationship between the United States and China. And if we keep messing around and not focusing on it, and our kids are going to wake up in a world in which the most powerful country in the world is a totalitarian, communist dictatorship, not the United States of America.
Senator Rubio, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me on.